Firstly, we had a couple of reports, not many articles, but I did find this article published on a website called Hindustan Times, saying that Iran cancelled all flights until 7th of October due to operational restrictions, according to that report. Now, mind you, some people had a bit of confusion when it comes to Iran shutting down their airspace when they conducted the attack on Israel. But this is indeed for tonight. We're talking about 9 p.m., which is already past 9 p.m. in Iran, up until 6 a.m. on the 7th of October. And that is most likely in preparation for a potential Israeli attack. Yesterday, we spoke about the fact that we're looking at potentially 24 to 48 hours. Again, these are assumptions at the end of the day, but there are certain indications. We are almost 1 week into the attack from Iran on Israel, and Israel made it very clear that they will be carrying out an attack on Iran. Some of them said, well, in the right time, in the right place, with the right intensity. We had, statements varying in terms of fierceness when it comes to Iran. But what we do know is that they are preparing an attack on Iran, and such attack will be fully backed by the United States of America, the US administration, if not promoted again by the US administration, because when we talk about Israel and the US, you're talking about the same thing. Really, if the United States indeed wanted to apply certain pressure on Israel, they would have, by stopping their military aid and stopping the funding that goes to Israel and the constant impunity that they give the Israeli regime. But we've seen the opposite. We've seen the United States enabling this, encouraging it, not condemning anything, and continuing to support Israel, regardless of all of the talk about these hopeful scenarios or positivity, or the fact that they are applying pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. So we're going to start off with this article. All flights from Iran's airports have been cancelled from 9 p.m. on Sunday until 6 a.m. local time, or 2:30 GMT on Monday, state media reported, citing spokesperson for Iran's Civil Aviation Organization. The flights were halted due to operational restrictions, the spokesperson said, without providing further details. Because of those restrictions, the flights at some airports of the country will be cancelled from 9 p.m. tonight, Sunday, October the 6th, until 6 a.m. tomorrow, October the 7th, according to IRNA State News Agency. This comes amid heightened tensions between Iran and Israel following Tehran's missile attacks on Israel last week. Iran launched around 200 missiles on Tuesday, marking its second direct strike on Israel this year, in what it described as retaliation for the killing of Iranian-aligned militant leaders and a senior commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Israel has vowed to retaliate, although it has yet to specify when or how. The Iranian airspace was closed on Tuesday night for nearly 2 days following the missile attack, before flights resumed on Thursday morning. Security concerns were cited as the reason for the temporary shutdown for both domestic and international flights. The European Aviation Safety Agency has advised airlines to avoid Iranian airspace until October 31st due to the volatile situation, and the advisory is under ongoing review. Amid concerns of potential Israeli strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure, Oil Minister Mohsen Paknejad visited Kharg Island. Kharg Island, we spoke about it yesterday, and the fact that Iran took off some of its empty oil tankers. However, they were still using it whenever needed, but they are taking certain measures to avoid potential risk when it comes to the Israeli or upcoming potential Israeli attack. They continued home to the country's largest oil export terminal on Sunday. According to the oil ministry's news agency, Shana, Ahmadinejad met with a senior Revolutionary Guards Navy commander to discuss the security of the country's key oil and gas facilities. Israel has not ruled out the possibility of targeting Iran's oil facilities. As part of its retaliation, Iranian oil exports, which make up around 3% of global output, have reached near multi-year highs, with China being the primary buyer despite US sanctions. The Kharg Island terminal, from which around 90% of Iranian oil exports are shipped, has storage capacity of 23 million barrels of crude, making it a critical site in Iran's oil industry. So, firstly, when it comes to the warnings, these warnings are not restricted only to Iran. We had warnings to civilians in Lebanon, to citizens in Israel. Russia issued a very intense warning to all Russians residing in Israel to leave so long as such an opportunity exists. And you're talking about 1.5 million Russians. So clearly, things are escalating and countries know that something is about to happen. When it comes to Russia, they chose now when they could have issued such a severe warning previously, but this also came after the Israeli attack near one of their air bases in Syria. That's the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Iran is clearly preparing. They are anticipating something which could potentially be tonight within the next few hours. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you about. There was a reported earthquake. However, some people suspect that it might not be an earthquake. And if it wouldn't be an earthquake, they thought it might be, or at least assumed that it might be, an Iranian nuclear bomb test. So we had this article here. Did Iran conduct underground nuclear test on Saturday night? Measured earthquake in region suggests, and they continued, the intensity was 4.5 on the Richter scale. An earthquake of moderate intensity occurred in Iran and Israel on Saturday night, October the 5th. Strangely enough, both the countries experienced the earthquake at a marginal difference in the timing. In such a situation, it is being speculated whether Iran has conducted its nuclear test. The earthquake occurred in the Aradan city of Semnan province in Iran. Its intensity was 4.5 on the Richter scale. The earthquake occurred at around 10:45 p.m. local time, and its epicenter was at depth of only 10 kilometers from the ground. The tremors were felt in Tehran, which is 110 kilometers away from the epicenter of the earthquake, reports the US Geological Survey. Given the intense state of conflict between Iran and Israel, people have started linking the earthquakes in these two countries with Iran's nuclear tests on social media. There have been speculations in many reports that it was not an earthquake, rather Iran conducted underground nuclear tests, due to which a shock was felt in both countries. A report claimed that the earthquake in Iran occurred very close to the nuclear power plant, so it cannot be said whether the shock was due to an earthquake or a nuclear test. Another report claimed that the earthquake in Iran could be an underground nuclear test because its center was at a depth of only 10 kilometers from the ground. In such a situation, the speculation about Iran's nuclear test has deepened. Actually, the earthquakes in Iran and Israel occurred amidst the boiling tensions between the two Middle East countries after the alleged killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Iran rained about 400 missiles on Israel on October 1st. Israel has vowed strong retaliation following the Iranian attack. And to elaborate a little bit further, one of the, it's an Armenian source, they came up with an image claiming that the intensity was not normal, the way that and I'm no expert when it comes to earthquakes, but they said that the intensity of the actual earthquake does not come in line with normal earthquakes. That's why they had more speculations that Iran could have potentially conducted a nuclear test. This is not something new. Of course, Iran officially denies that they have a nuclear project. However, when they were threatened with a nuclear response from Israel following their initial attack, or after, more specifically, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran by Israel, they said that you can be attacked with a nuclear bomb. And Iran responded to that by saying, we will respond with the same intensity or same power. And many people analyze that as a clue, a hint that Iran might have a nuclear bomb at its disposal should it need it. Do they already have it? Will it be borrowed? Has it been purchased? Was it delivered? All of that is something else, but they would potentially have it at their disposal if required. There were reports that the Russians would allow them to use a nuclear bomb, other reports that they could have obtained one from North Korea, or potentially have developed it themselves, because the nuclear project of Iran is very old. And we also had periods, in particular after the fall of the Soviet Union, where you had an open market for nuclear weapons, and many countries purchased nuclear weapons without declaring anything. So it's intense. And again, that could be true, that could not be true, but we are analyzing what we're seeing now and the reports that we're getting. We wouldn't be surprised if Iran would conduct an operation now, because when it comes to the attack from Israel, you cannot underestimate the damage that Israel could inflict on Iran. It would not be a walk in the park, especially with the fact that Iran definitely has S-300 air defense systems alongside their versions of something similar to S-300s. There were reports back in August that they received the S-400, which is even more advanced with a longer range. So, tense situations, and Iran is, of course, preparing with the oil tanker situation, with the airspace closure, and with this report of this potential nuclear test. It does not seem like Israel is backing down on the response. Today we had statements from Yoav Gallant saying that we will respond, but we will respond in the time, in the intensity, and in the location that we will decide. However, I don't think that Israel is in a position to delay such an attack very much. The United States is already deployed. They already sent many troops and had reinforcements, increased their presence, their levels. They have the aircraft carriers. Of course, how likely are they to be that effective with the latest show that we had from Iran with over 90% success rates on Israel with their supersonic and hypersonic missiles? I'm not sure. But it wouldn't be a walk in the park, any attack on Iran. And there is a very high likelihood that Iran would be immediately responding on Israel, and we could see that potentially happening within the next few hours. These were the first two things that I want to talk to you about. The second thing that I want to talk to you about is, now we are almost 1 year into the 7th of October. Hamas conducted an unprecedented attack on Israel where they took down the whole Gaza division, and they went to control Israeli territories and also kidnapped civilians in Israel. Israel immediately came up with certain claims about the scale, about what actually happened, that were later debunked from Israeli sources, especially when it comes to the stories of the beheaded babies or the rapes that were conducted apparently as claimed by Israel and were later debunked. And of course, we later found out that Israel carried out the majority of the massacres against the civilians in the Nova Festival, in Ra'im, in Nir Oz. And we had statements coming from the Israeli army, or people from the Israeli army to be more specific. One of them was a pilot who spoke with the residents of Nir Oz, who admitted to them that they were ordered to shoot at everything back, going back to Gaza on the 7th of October, so that they don't give Hamas leverage when it comes to Israeli prisoners. Then, of course, we had the statements from Israelis saying that most of the civilians who were killed in the Israeli kibbutzes or settlements were killed due to fire from the IDF, who suspected the presence of certain Hamas fighters in locations, and they decided to attack all of them. Then we started to have more or some Israelis being released from the Hamas captivity in Gaza, saying that they were targeted all along, the first ones and the last ones as well. The first one was Yocheved Lifshitz, who was released on a humanitarian basis. And then the latest one was Noa Argamani, saying that she was wounded all across her body because of Israeli strikes. There were many indications that Israel deliberately targeted their own civilians in Gaza, including some Israeli troops as well, where they wanted to target certain figures in Hamas, and sometimes without targeting any figures in Hamas, just to reduce the price of potential request or demand that Hamas would have in return to release these people going from Gaza. This is evident, this neglect of the Israelis who were kidnapped, especially coming from the recent statement that we had from the IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, when he said that we might not bring back anyone to Israel. So you have the families of the Israelis already blaming Netanyahu. Now they're calling him the cabinet of death, his cabinet, the cabinet of death. Today we had small protests in Kaplan in Tel Aviv. And the families of the Israelis imprisoned in Gaza are still criticizing the government heavily. Of course, the intensity was much higher up until the increase and escalation with Lebanon. Netanyahu was trying to run forward. But we still have criticism coming from Israel saying that this will not bring the people back. When it comes to the attack itself, Hamas, a couple of days after their attacks, they said that we are immediately, it wasn't even just a couple of days, it was almost exactly after the attack. Firstly, they elaborated that they conducted this attack because they've been trying to reach an agreement with Israel to have a prisoner swap, because they had Israelis in Gaza from 2014 who their families already told the Israeli government, you're neglecting them anyway, but no one was asking about them, and that Israel refused, and that Israel doesn't want to reach a solution when it comes to the Palestinian people, the constant attacks on the Palestinians, the administrative detention, the oppression, the apartheid regime in the West Bank, and the fact that Gaza has been suffering for 17 years living in an open air prison, and the fact that we're talking about a historical case here when it comes to the Palestinian case. So they elaborated that you haven't reached an agreement with us in diplomatic manner, so we had to conduct this operation. However, we are willing to stop our operation now and reach an agreement where we release our prisoners and we release all of the Israelis that we have in captivity. Of course, Israel decided to go on this campaign that really made no sense, because it put the Israelis at risk, and that was evident 1 month in. They killed over 50 Israelis just in the first month, as confirmed by the Palestinian resistance. And now 1 year on, they haven't achieved any of their objectives in Gaza. You're still talking about Hamas presence. As a matter of fact, Israel, they admit now that Hamas is controlling everything over the ground in Gaza. They control 2 million Palestinians, according to multiple Israeli articles that we read in the past couple of weeks in Israel. And the Palestinian resistance still able to conduct activities against Israel, and they haven't brought back the Israelis who are imprisoned in Gaza, meaning they haven't achieved any of their declared objectives. If we want to talk about the undeclared objectives, which are total destruction and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, they have achieved destruction, but they haven't achieved the ethnic cleansing, not only for the sake of, but when it comes to the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance primarily, but also because of the Egyptian position not to allow a mass exodus of Palestinians into Egyptian territory, particularly in Sinai, because they knew that from their perspective, Israel has a plan to reoccupy Sinai. They wanted the Palestinians to be expelled to Sinai, and then they wanted to have that as a pretext to go and attack them in Sinai and put the blame on Egypt as a whole to legitimize an all-out attack on Egypt, something that Egypt, of course, was aware too, and something that would have potentially been supported by the United States administration and all of the countries that support Israel. This is where we are now when it comes to Gaza. Failure when it comes to the objectives. The pressure on Netanyahu has been increasing, but no one was able to take him down. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu, when it reached the peak of the protests against him internally, and again, we could be talking a lot, by the way, about the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu received numerous criticisms coming from people in Israel, in the security establishment, in the military establishment, previous prime ministers, and a big chunk of the Israeli society about the way this operation has been conducted and the fact that he is not prioritizing the lives of the Israelis. Netanyahu always avoided this, and he went on with his own campaign because he had bigger plans. He's talking about a man that 2 weeks following the 7th of October started to hand out gas exploration contracts. And you had people preparing to go and settle in Gaza. And we also had indications and proof coming from Israel that certain troops in Israel knew about a potential attack, and they were dismissed their warnings by their commanders, hinting to a certain prior knowledge that something was about to happen, potentially not the scale, not the level that they would anticipate, but something was about to happen, and Israel wanted to use that as an opportunity to once and for all get rid of the Palestinian population in Gaza, because from their perspective, that would give the demographics in Israel a new level of protection for the next coming decades. Israel has had a problem with the demographics ever since 2015, when we had majority Palestinian population between the Jordan River to the sea, so Israel, West Bank, Gaza, more than the Jewish population, because many of the Israeli Jews live outside of Israel, but Israel still includes them in their statistics that they live inside of Israel. And of course, they view that as a threat, as a risk. Why? Because they want to keep the regime of Jewish supremacy in Israel. If you start having an increased number of Palestinians and you have somewhat of democratic participation, and the calls, the increasing calls really, for equal rights between the Jordan River to the sea, then you might be talking about people looking to reshape the country, something that Israel did not want. Israel now is escalating. To them, it's not only Gaza. To them, they are behaving in a manner similar to the time of inception of the State of Israel, with the philosophy of our borders end with where the foot of our last soldier steps on. Meaning, they are using this as an opportunity to expand things further. This opportunity is coming not without US knowledge, not without US planning, and also not without US will. And when we talk about the US, of course, we talk about the United States administration. Even we had the supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, in his Friday sermon speech saying that the United States wants Israel to be the energy export hub and the export hub of technology to and from the region. And we have people in Israel in power, in the government, calling for the greater Israel, and Israel that stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates. And we have an actual implementation or an attempted implementation of that. Israel is waging a war of extermination. In Lebanon, they are taking the same steps that they took in Gaza. They are still faced with severe resistance, despite the fact that they had infiltrations at such high levels in Lebanon in particular. But when it comes to the functioning of the actions that are being carried out against them, they haven't been able to take that down or reduce its intensity. As a matter of fact, ever since the escalation from Israel, we have seen an escalation with resistance. The maximum that we had before this escalation is the minimum now, a minimum of 200 missiles a day on Israel that are larger in diameter, that reach deeper into Israeli territory, and that put more Israelis at risk and force more Israelis out of their homes. This is something that Hezbollah told them, but again, Israel did not listen. So we are talking about a stage where we are seeing no genuine steps to de-escalate. Israel is again using this as an opportunity, and they are looking to set themselves as the only power in the region. They have genuine intentions to take down any resistance in Lebanon, any resistance in Gaza, expel the Palestinians of the West Bank, and then change, like they call it, the government in Iran as well. These messages that Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking about and sending are not purposeless. You're talking about a man who is serious in what he's doing, and he is again being supported by the United States. So this was really the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We're seeing escalation, and we haven't seen potentially the worst of it yet. You could have a severe Israeli attack on Iran. If such an attack happens, you will see a very severe response coming from Iran. We had hints of that from the attack that was carried out on Israel, but again, that doesn't seem like it's stopping Israel, and the United States is nowhere near as serious when it comes to the advice that they're giving the Israelis to avoid escalation or refrain from attacking certain strategic locations in Iran, something that will lead to something much bigger.